My Friend the Doctor. Part 1. I worked as a crane operator in a warehouse of finished products of a reinforced concrete construction plant on the far outskirts of Riga. The cranes there were radio-controlled, and therefore crane operators, kings of the sky, ran on the mortal earth, looking, as a rule, out of 1,000 panels pieces of 10 necessary, and loaded them on the wrecked semi-trailers of private carriers. The warehouse manager, a fat, phlegmatic, and aggressive Latvian girl, did not participate in the work process in any way. She said that she didn't want to hear anything about failures in work, and we had to deal with all the issues ourselves. She had a favorite, Janus, a gaunt, shouting man who imitated vigorous activity and snitched on those from whom he demanded a bottle as a bribe, although he had no official position of foreman. I patiently tolerated all his oddities, knowing that after working 12 months, I would quit and receive unemployment benefits, and learn a new profession at the expense of the state, and very slowly find a new place of work with more polite colleagues and adequate wages. I worked through a frosty spring and then a hot summer. The scorching sun had turned my face purple. Even though I didn't drink a drop of alcohol in those years, I was mistaken for a drunk. And when I changed out of my work clothes and into a dress suit, I looked like a stoned punk. We mostly worked 12 or even 14 hours a day. I lived in a dilapidated house near the factory, with a tiny stove and a water pump in the yard. I used goat trails to get to the industrial zone by bicycle, which sometimes took half an hour. There was almost no time for entertainment. On weekends, I often worked too. Sometimes I felt a bit homesick and wanted to crush the screaming Janus with a panel. Maybe I would have done it, but suddenly at the end of the summer, a new person came to the team. It's morning. My brain feels like it's squeezing into my cramped skull, pressing on my eyeballs. Sticking my hand out of the sleeping bag, I press the button of the electric kettle and shove the alarm clock under the pillow. With a jerk, I rose from the tall tada, sat down at the table, and put the frying pan on the electric stove. Shoving scrambled eggs down my gullet, I remembered that my partner Tolian had scalded his hand with boiling water on a drunken rampage, and I would have to work together with Janus. To perceive this fact impartially, I turned on civil defense and smoked a pipe. The odorous smoke caused a spasm in my esophagus. Riding my bike along the dusty country lane, I felt better, the blood rushing from my head. And the sight of the sun rising over the forest made me think of a bright future on welfare. The locker room was empty and stank of worn socks from the dryer. The factory bus had not yet delivered the working meat to its destination. In the cabin, where our brigade was resting and having lunch, sat Kolya, a tractor driver, a short-tempered man, with aristocratic appearance and manners in Janus. Once again, "You asterisk 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 all," pronounced Janus, curling his fingers like the heroes of his favorite crime shows. "Come here and fall down. Have some tea before your execution." "The most," began Kolya, gracefully waving his long-fingered narrow palm. "One latecomer has already been dismissed. Now this latecomer is all the blame. George never came out of his drunkenness." Janus grinned gloatingly. "Yesterday he got his papers, and at the gate he went into the dog's kennel. The dog bit his tit off. That's what he should do, you fucking kinologist. Agnieszka says the new guy's coming today at 8. "I wish they'd gotten George out of his booze," I said gloomily. "At least he didn't drink every day, and he knew his business. He was calm. And train the new one again, and he'll either drink or forget about work. If the new one doesn't know shit, I'll break his horns with half a stick. Then we'll work together." "I can do it alone." Janus got excited. "What's this crane to me? It's shit. I've worked at sea on winches with 21 speeds. You've never dreamed of such a thing. What's the use of your crusts? I'm 100 times faster and better than you and Tolian. High-rise men, professionals, I'm working on all of you here. What's wrong?" "That's right," I agreed dumbly. "Give me yesterday's list. I'll go look for them. When's the car coming?" I'd already found them while you were jerking off in bed. Yeah. So why am I here this early if you've already found them? Don't get smart with me. Go and look again. I forgot to mark it. The tracker is growing up, threw Kolya in my wake. Maybe in 20 years something will come out of him. Having found and marked all the panels, I sat down in the shade and smoked. I didn't feel like going back to the cabin and talking to my colleagues there. The car hadn't arrived yet. 8 o'clock. A long line of men and women of different ages stretched across the gatehouse. A young plasterer with a black eye and lush buttocks, draped in jeans, smiled shyly at me as she passed by. Some nodded carelessly at me, some separated from the crowd and ran up to bail me out. I searched the crowd for an unfamiliar face, noting 3 men with the faces of hardened alcoholics. Every day, the factory fired the guilty or disgruntled and hired new ones, often just released from prison. Some of them would sit quietly in the workshop, brewing themselves stronger tea, diluting it sometimes with industrial alcohol, and after a couple of days they would buy themselves a sick leave. Others would bend their fingers, show their tattoos, show off their ponces, get drunk, and they would be fired. I didn't expect anything good from the new guy. Time stretched slowly, nothing was happening, and I went to the camp. Janus was talking to the boss, Agnes. A curly-haired young man stood at the door to the boss's office. The boss came up to me and the curly-haired one and said very quietly, squeamishly speaking in Russian, that it was Igor whom I would have to introduce today. Through the open door, I saw a car drive under the crane. I nodded sullenly to Igor to follow me and walked quickly to the stacks of panels. Replace the battery in the remote control. Janus shouted after me. That in an hour to train him and load 3 cars. Got it. Why don't you say anything? You're full of shit. Give me the lists. The battery's not charged yet. We'll replace it later. It's hot, said Igor, a little behind me. It's cold here in winter. I'll probably leave here as soon as it gets colder. I have 3 months before I get my allowance. It's gotten really bad at Severstall. They're fed up, so I've decided to take another 3 months here and retire, or maybe I'll take a sick leave sooner. This was said with a cheeky but kind smile. A frank confession was better than Janus' cries that I had to work. I lit a cigarette and began to briefly explain the work process. Gave him the remote control to try to drive the crane a little. He brought a wide sling to himself, sat in its loop, and began to lift himself, laughing carefree. Let's load the car, I said, grinning sadly at his antics. Get down before Kosciuszko comes. He'll start babbling about winches with 21 speeds and ports of Latin America. He was working in a relaxed manner, without any nervousness, which usually attacks newcomers. He asked useful questions. With jokes and jokes, we discreetly loaded a couple of cars. Janus came in and irritably snatched the remote control out of my hands and started his usual song. Igor smilingly shouted at me, "Hey, let's lower this slab on Yanka's head, because he felt something bad, and it will be cozy under it, like under a tombstone." There was no aggression in what was said, but there was no respect for the elderly informal leader. Janus was confused and remained silent. "Listen," he said to me, muffled, cautiously squinting toward the newcomer, who was invisible from behind the panels. "What are you doing here?" I always kept silent and smiled thoughtfully when my older colleague behaved like that. Usually he ran around me and yapped, and then said that he had no time for such a shit like me to get his hands dirty, and in an hour apologized for his hotness, shook my hand, promised to put in a good word for me to the boss. All of his performances bored me from the first working week, and I listened to them absent-mindedly like wind noise. "Priest?" The newcomer, who was suddenly next to us, asked with the same carefree smile. "Are you really?" "Hell do it," Janus said irritably and ran off to find the missing panel. "I've never been to church, I just have a long beard, that's why they call me that." "And I have been," he said dispassionately. "Not an archpriest, of course, but only an altar boy, an assistant to the father in the rank of subdeacon." The next day, Igor was half an hour late. Without any embarrassment, he showed his wet pants to Imanta, the deputy storekeeper. From the train, he walked straight across the field. I remembered a song. I'll get off at a distant station. The grass is waist deep. Everything here is mine, and I'm from here. Shit, I forgot. When I studied accordion at music school, I played it. And your name is so interesting. My neighborhood is called the same. So you're a musician, smiled Imanta, who usually had a long time to reprimand latecomers. Maybe you'll organize an amateur group here. But not today. Yesterday I was celebrating my new job, so I'm having a hard time without a beer. Are you drunk? You can't do that here. Finns don't tolerate it. They fire you right away. They call a security guard with a pipe, make a report, and that's it. But according to the labor code, I can refuse to take the test, demand that they take me to the clinic to take a urine or blood test. And I know how to take these tests correctly, and I have a lot of friends among the medical profession. You're also a lawyer. I just read the law sometimes, it's interesting. To read laws, Imanta sighed condescendingly. You have to know Latvian. You're dead wrong if you think you can get a medical degree in Latvia without knowing the language. You're also a doctor. Imanta spoke in her native language. I'm just a paramedic, and I lost my diploma a long time ago, Igor replied in broken Latvian. I've been chatting with you. She switched back to Russian. Eugene is already waiting here, go and change. You two will go to the far site to work together. The factory bus leaves from Shkuratava station at 8 sharp. I've already traced the path from Gaisma. It's not that far, but it's wet. But it's better from Shkuratava, of course, if there's a bus. I decided that he was forgiven for the first time, but Igor's further behavior showed that this standard conclusion was wrong. 2 days later, Igor and Tolian told me to stay late and unload into the warehouse what the factory had made in 3 days. Janus's frenetic activity made it impossible to do this during the day. Overtime hours were doubly paid, so Agnes was always dissatisfied with the speed of overtime. She made an inhuman effort to reach the platform, stood behind me, and started hissing about my inactivity. It's elementary. The crane can lift 24 tons, and you take only 3 2-ton panels. I understand that you want more money, but this is the wrong way. Better work fast like Janus, and you'll get paid like him. Do you know the lifting capacity of the slings? You know what they are. They're only rated for 12 tons. And Janus panels don't break, because we don't hook them correctly, as he claims, but because the top ones press on the bottom ones and they burst. I had already tabulated several times which panels, and in what order to lift them, so that nothing would break. I was getting nervous, looking into the watery eyes of the boss, in which there was no thought, but there was an unshakable confidence in her rightness. I'm not interested in your stupid tables. I am the boss, and I will be smarter than you. I have a higher education, and you have a fucking vocational school. You don't need any tables, you just need to work fast and not write yourself extra hours. Agnes, suddenly the doctor spoke, almost laughing. Let me take the initiative. I just want to get home today, and the transport only runs until 11 o'clock, and I have to go through the center with a transfer. I'll take all the panels at once, and we'll unload it all in a couple of lifts, and to hell with all the tables. Just don't forget to calculate how much they weigh in total. She decided to avoid conflict and chose to ignore the sneer in the doctor's address, so as not to break the faucet. Don't worry, said the doctor, laughing openly with Tolian. I know how to count. Look, each panel costs 800 lats, and that's your salary for 3 months. She rolled like a half-deflated ball to her sports car. The doctor nonchalantly started the slings, took the remote control, and the 6 new panels turned into a shapeless pile of construction debris. Tolian laughed like a child, jumped in his 50s on one leg, swung on the slings, launched plastic plugs into the blue sky like flying saucers. Don't throw the ones with the tags on them over the fence. The doctor collected the tags from 20 panels and walked toward the boss's sports car. She scrambled out of her chair and burst into a cock-crowing scream. The doctor, smiling, handed her a stack of tags and nodded toward the piles of rubble. "You'll be paying for everything. All 3 of you, idiots. Select your language," the doctor said in a nonchalant tone of voice. "I'm a nuisance, I can sue. I've got a recorder in my cell phone and it's working now." "I don't care." The words stuck in her throat with anger. "Today you're laughing, tomorrow you'll be crying." "Why should we cry?" the doctor asked, lightheartedly. "We won't pay, you might, but only if it's voluntary. According to the labor law, no deductions can be made from employees' salaries unless he voluntarily signs the report, and if he refuses to do so, we will have to sue him. The labor inspectorate will come and first of all demand all documents on the crane, then on the slings, on the certification documents of employees. Do you want that? Don't scare me. I'm not scaring you, I'm giving you free legal advice. And there's an interesting article that says you can't deduct from an employee's last paycheck. And if you want to fire me, that's a dead end too. I won't sign anything, and I'll go home feeling sick, and the next day I'll be on sick leave. I hope you know it's illegal to fire someone who's on sick leave. Here, I heard there was a precedent when a person was sent his documents by registered mail, firing him retroactively, and then 2 years he was paid an average salary until he found a new job. So checkmate to you, Comrade Grandmaster. Eugen, unload as you see fit. Don't give him the remote control and don't listen to what he says. You're in charge here and they must obey you." "That's right." I saluted in a military manner, standing at attention. To my surprise, no one touched the doctor. He worked quietly, drank, and was always cheerful. Janus really disliked his progress in work, which was in his face. In the evening, the doctor and I spent a little more time putting the panels in order so that in the morning it would be convenient to load them on the cars. Janus used to shuffle the panels every day so that we couldn't find them, but we invented another tactic for this case. We drew a map of the warehouse on the wall in the hut and marked with chalk where exactly what was lying. Sometimes the doctor would come up to Imanta and say that he was cold and wet on the site, and that he wanted to go home to his mother and drink tea with raspberry jam. He said this as if joking, but he was really going to go home. One day he came in completely drunk and only to take a couple of official days off. He explained the reason for his drunkenness by buying a car. He was given the time off, and there were no remarks about his condition. Janus kept quiet about him in front of me. Only once he said very seriously that he would not want to be in the hands of such a paramedic when he called the ambulance. Then Egil joined the brigade. Before that he had worked at another section of the mill, making formwork, but a new foreman had been appointed there who had tightened the nuts. Most of the carpenters went on strike, which the union did not support. Some accepted it, but most of them scattered to other sites. Translated with www.deeple.com/translator, free version. I am the law. Egil sat at the head of the table where Janus usually sat, and began merely mimicking his favorite characters. Meet the docent. By the way, if you offend me, if you deprive me of my vision by hooliganism, I will be stressed, and I will go on sick leave for a long time. So it's in your best interest to be nice to me. Another one sitting on my neck. Janus snarled as he stepped out onto the platform. Hey, you assholes, let's get to work. Kohol, did you find the panels or do you only know how to hook them? When we're alone here, Tullian suddenly became indignant. You can call us whatever you want, but we're warriors here, and don't do it in front of them. And in front of this new Edgul too. Why are you grunting? The situation was rapidly escalating. Janus began, as always, to get nervous and show his anger, while Tullian was calm and insisted on a public apology. Egil was chatting merrily with the doctor about something. Their loud laughter forced Janus to show who was in charge. He tried to give his opponent a slash, but Tullian deftly jumped over his leg and professionally slammed his fist under his breath. The dictator collapsed from surprise, darting his eyes, and then curled up in a ball and wrapped his arms around his head. Tullian waited a little while for his opponent to get up, dancing like a boxer, and with a resentful look walked toward the shed. Janus got there faster. Then they both sat hunched in different corners of the warehouse, and I worked with the doctor alone. "When a place," said the doctor, sipping tea in the shed. "Aren't you sick of all this hoovering?" "I'm bored," I said wistfully. "I want to get out of here as soon as possible. It's like a high-security camp." We divided the warehouse into zones, and do not notice that we are prisoners in these zones. The closer we get to discharge, the more painful it gets. You should take a sick day, 2 weeks. You'll get some rest, and Janus might think about how to behave. Do you want the address and phone number of a doctor I know? Private practice. Lat for a day's sick leave. Angel's math is right. Travel, rations, time. It's better to stay home. So they'll give you a small allowance. So you're a yellow squirrel. So take the yellow one. It doesn't affect your allowance. You'll get it. The employer pays for 2 weeks. I can't do that. I've never been on sick leave. Nonsense. It's only scary the first time. But the soldier sleeps and the deadline passes. The next day, having eaten sandwiches with smoked meat for lunch, I felt that I was nauseous. Stepping behind the panels, I stuck 2 fingers down my throat and threw the bad product out of my stomach. This was repeated several times. The doctor went to Amanta and asked her to call an ambulance, but I refused. The official working day was over, and so I changed my clothes and went to the bus. I didn't follow the road, but walked straight through the fields. In the middle of the field, my strength left me, and I started to feel feverish. Lying in the tall grass, I felt that now, perhaps, I would throw off my hooves. I smirked as I lost consciousness, hoping I would leave this world so easily, better than going on the long-awaited unemployment benefit. I don't know how long I'd been unconscious, but stomach cramps forced me to stand on all 4 limbs and unconsciously move forward. As if in a dream, I found myself on a bus, where I was once again turned inside out. Passengers were pointing fingers at me and calling me a junkie. At the first city hospital, I squatted in line. When my turn finally came, they told me to go home and call an ambulance. That's the way they do things, you know. An hour of agony and I got to my father's house, and in the morning I went to the therapist for a sick leave, as the doctor had taught me. The doctor said that yesterday the day did not work. Ludmila Lishitz, shaking her gray curls, looked at me through her glasses and said that she saw nothing painful in me. I wanted to go to work with dignity on shaky legs, but she still gave me 3 days of sick leave, calling me a miserable simulant. After I got the prescriptions, I took some pills, which made me sick again. Translated with www.deepl.com/translator, free version.